Christmas Eve is supposed to smell like pine and cinnamon. That night, it smelled like cold air trapped in wool coats and something metallic I couldn't name yet. The lodge was already warm with noise when I heard the front door open again. Late arrivals always drew attention. Laughter paused. Someone said Aaron's name. I didn't turn right away. I was tying a ribbon around a box meant for my niece. The bow kept slipping. My fingers were stiff from the cold, or maybe from the quiet tension that had been sitting under my skin all evening. When I finally looked up, Aaron was standing just inside the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, cheeks flushed from the drive. He wasn't alone. The woman beside him took in the room like she belonged there. Not cautious, not apologetic. She stepped forward before he did, her boots leaving wet crescents on the wooden floor. She smiled at everyone, then at me, a quick, polite glance that slid past my face and landed on Sophie. Sophie was sitting cross-legged on the rug, tearing open wrapping paper with the fierce focus only children have. She looked up when the woman spoke. "Oh, hi," the woman said, light and friendly. "Are you the babysitter?" The word hung there, perfectly shaped, perfectly wrong. I remember thinking how strange it was that no one laughed, not nervously, not awkwardly, just silence, thick enough to press against my ears. Sophie looked at me, confused, a question forming before language. I stood up slowly, the ribbon still looped around my fingers like something unfinished. Aaron didn't say anything. He didn't rush to correct her. He didn't even look surprised. His hand rested on the small of the woman's back, fingers spread in a way that suggested familiarity, practice. I watched his thumb move, just once, like a reassurance. To her. "I'm Naomi," I said. My voice sounded steady, as if it belonged to someone else. "I'm her mother." The woman's smile faltered, only slightly. "Oh," she said. "I'm sorry. She glanced at Aaron, waiting for him to fill in the space. He didn't. I didn't realize. "It's fine," I said, because it was easier than saying anything else. Because the room was full of people who loved us, and none of them knew where to look. Aaron finally spoke then. "This is Lila," he said, like he was introducing a colleague at a work dinner. "She's with me." With me. I nodded once. I noticed the way my heartbeat slowed instead of racing, as if my body had decided this moment needed clarity more than panic. The tree lights hummed. Somewhere a glass clinked against a counter. Someone cleared their throat. Sophie stood and walked toward me, pressing her small hand into mine. Her fingers were warm. She leaned into my hip, a habit she'd never grown out of, and I wrapped my arm around her shoulders automatically. I felt the weight of her, anchoring me to the floor. "Daddy?" she asked, looking past me. Aaron smiled at her, the same smile he used in photos. "Hey, kiddo." She looked at Lila again. "Is she staying for dinner?" I waited. I don't know why I waited. Maybe I still believed he would step forward and say something that would make this make sense, or at least make it kinder. He didn't. "Yes," Lila said too quickly. "If that's okay." "Of course," someone else said. A voice from the kitchen, a host instinct kicking in. Plates were already set. Food was already warm. The night had momentum, and momentum is hard to stop without making a mess. I let go of Sophie's hand. "Go wash up," I told her. "Dinner's almost ready." She hesitated, then nodded and patted away, her socks sliding on the floor. I watched her until she turned the corner. Then I looked back at Aaron. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe? Or calculation? It disappeared before I could be sure. "Naomi," he said softly, like my name was something fragile. "Excuse me," I said. I didn't wait for permission. I walked past him, past Lila, past the pile of coats and boots. My reflection caught in the dark window by the door, my face pale, eyes bright in a way I didn't recognize. I opened the door and stepped outside. The cold hit me hard, clean and sharp. Snow crunched under my shoes. I inhaled, slow and deep, until my lungs burned. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate, as if the world is holding its breath with you. I didn't cry. Not then. I stood there and counted the seconds between my breaths. I noticed how the stars looked sharper up here, how the porch light cast a soft circle on the snow. I noticed the way my hands trembled when I tried to tuck them into my coat pockets. Inside, the door opened. Footsteps approached, hesitant. "I should have told you," Aaron said, stopping a few feet away from me. "Yes," I said. I didn't turn around. "You should have. I didn't plan for it to happen like this." I closed my eyes. "How did you plan for it to happen?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched again, familiar now, like something I'd been living with longer than I realized. "She asked if I was the babysitter," I said, my voice still calm. "Do you know what that feels like?" He exhaled. "Naomi, no," I said, finally turning to face him. "Don't explain it. Not tonight." His face looked older in the porch light. Tired. I saw suddenly how far away he already was. How this moment wasn't an accident, but a reveal. A curtain pulled back without warning. "I'm going back inside," I said. "Sophie is there." He nodded, relief and something else crossing his features. "Okay." I walked past him again, back into the warmth and noise. Lila was standing by the tree, admiring ornaments I'd collected over years, stories attached to each one she didn't know. She smiled at me, tentative now. "I really am sorry," she said. I met her eyes. "You don't need to be. Dinner happened. I served food. I asked polite questions. I cut Sophie's meat and reminded her to say thank you. I watched Aaron laugh with Lila, watched him lean close to hear her over the noise, watched her touch his arm as if checking something was still there. Something in me settled, heavy and quiet. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I lay awake listening to the wind move through the trees. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the moment in the living room, the way that single word had cracked something open. Babysitter, as if I were temporary, as if my place could be mistaken so easily. I didn't know then what I would do. I only knew that something had ended, cleanly and without ceremony. The life I thought I was living had slipped sideways, revealing a fault line I could no longer ignore. Everything after would grow from that moment. But that night, all I did was lie still and let the quiet settle in. Before Christmas broke everything open, there was a long stretch of ordinary happiness. The kind you don't photograph because it doesn't announce itself. It just happens, quietly, while you're living inside it. Aaron and I met in our late 20s at a friend's birthday dinner. One of those loud, crowded tables where conversations overlap and nothing feels especially significant at first. He was sitting across from me, listening more than talking, smiling at the right moments. When the check came, he noticed I'd been passed over and slid it toward me without making a show of it. That was the first thing I liked about him. He paid attention without needing credit. We talked later that night outside the restaurant, the city still warm, traffic humming behind us. He asked thoughtful questions, not performative ones, real ones. What I wanted to build, what I was afraid of wasting. I remember thinking how rare it felt to be spoken to slowly, like there was time. Our early years were steady, not dramatic. We moved in together after a year, married 2 years later. No whirlwind, no chaos. Just a mutual decision to keep choosing each other. We both worked hard. I was deep into marketing then. Long hours, fast deadlines, the thrill of seeing something come together because you pushed it there. Aaron worked in finance, climbing methodically, always 2 steps ahead of where he'd been. We were a good team in those days. We cooked together most nights, music playing low, trading stories from our days. On weekends, we'd drive into the mountains, windows down, arguing gently about playlists. He had a dry sense of humor that snuck up on you. I laughed more with him than I ever had before. When Sophie was born, everything softened and sharpened at the same time. I don't think either of us expected how much love could rearrange a person. Aaron was attentive then. Midnight feedings, diaper changes, pacing the hallway with her pressed against his chest. I watched him become a father and felt something settle into place. This is it, I thought. This is the life. I shifted my career after that, not because he asked me to, but because it made sense. Consulting remotely gave us flexibility. It meant one of us could be present without everything falling apart. At the time, it felt like a shared decision, a practical one. We talked about it like equals, but small things changed, not sharply, gradually. Aaron's work became more opaque, not secretive exactly, just less open. Where he used to tell me about meetings, clients, office politics, he started summarizing instead. Long day. Same stuff. He stopped venting. I told myself it was maturity, professional boundaries. He took on more responsibility, and with it, more confidence. Sometimes that confidence edged into impatience. He corrected me in front of people, not harshly, just enough to sting. I brushed it off. Everyone does that sometimes. Money conversations shifted too. He began handling more of it, framing it as efficiency. "I'll take care of this," he'd say, waving off my questions with a kiss on the forehead. "One less thing for you to worry about." I let him. That's hard to admit now. But trust often looks like relief. It felt good to believe someone else had the weight. I still worked. I still contributed. But I stopped seeing the full picture, and I told myself that was partnership. There were moments, quiet ones, when something felt slightly off. He started traveling more, sometimes with little notice. He guarded his phone more carefully, turning the screen down when he set it on the table. When I asked about it, he laughed. "You're reading into things," he'd say. "I just don't want work emails popping up during dinner." I wanted to be the kind of person who didn't interrogate happiness, so I didn't. We grew efficient. Our days ran smoothly. Calendars synced. Responsibilities divided. From the outside, we looked solid. Reliable. The kind of couple people referenced when they talked about balance. But intimacy thinned. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice if you were paying attention. Conversations stayed on logistics. He listened less. When I spoke about my work, my ideas, he nodded without asking follow-up questions. I found myself filling the silence, then stopping, then trying again another time. Still, there were good moments. Family vacations, late-night movies when Sophie was asleep, his hand finding mine automatically in crowded places. Those moments kept me anchored. They told me the story I wanted to believe. I don't think Aaron woke up one day and decided to leave me behind. I think it happened in increments. Comfort turning into entitlement. Control mistaken for competence. Me becoming a fixture instead of a presence. The first time I really noticed the shift was a dinner party a few years ago. Someone asked what I did for work, and before I could answer, Aaron said, "She helps out with some consulting from home. Helps out." I smiled and corrected him gently. Explained my projects, my clients. He laughed it off. Right, he said. "I just mean she's flexible." That night, lying in bed, I told myself it didn't matter. Words slip. Intentions don't always land. Love is forgiving. I believed that. I don't want to pretend I was unhappy all the time. I wasn't. There was laughter. There was shared history. There was a child who felt safe and loved between us. That matters. That's real. But there was also a slow narrowing. My world shrinking just enough that I didn't notice until it had already happened. I deferred more, asked less, accepted answers that didn't fully answer anything. I trusted him. Fully. Not because he demanded it, but because nothing in our past had taught me not to. That's what made Christmas so devastating. Not the woman, not even the humiliation. It was the sudden clarity that the life I thought we were protecting together had been quietly redefined without my consent. Looking back now, I can see the hairline fractures, the subtle repositioning, the way my presence became assumed instead of valued. But at the time, it felt like stability, like adulthood, like love growing up. I tell you this because I don't want to rewrite history into something it wasn't. What we had mattered. It was real. And that's why losing it felt like losing ground beneath my feet instead of just losing a person. What broke on Christmas didn't break all at once. It had been weakening for years, patiently, invisibly. I just didn't know it yet. After Christmas, the house felt rearranged, though nothing had moved. The furniture stayed where it was. Sophie's drawings still lined the fridge. Aaron's coat still hung by the door. But the air between us had shifted, like a room after someone opens a window in winter and forgets to close it. We didn't talk about what happened. Not really. Aaron left early the next morning, saying he needed to clear his head. He didn't say where he was going. I didn't ask. The absence of explanation felt louder than any argument could have been. Sophie and I ate breakfast alone, the table too quiet, her feet swinging beneath the chair. "Is Daddy mad?" she asked, staring into her cereal. "No," I said. "He's just busy." I hated how easy that lie came out, how familiar it already felt. Days passed, then weeks. Aaron came home later than usual or not at all. When he did, he moved through the house carefully, like a guest trying not to disturb anything. He spoke politely, kindly even. That almost hurt more than anger would have. He stopped touching me entirely. No hand on my back as he passed. No absent-minded kiss on the cheek. It was as if his body had learned a new set of boundaries and obeyed them instinctively. I noticed changes the way you notice weather, gradually, then all at once. He showered the moment he got home, every time. Clothes went straight into the laundry, pockets emptied. He stopped leaving his phone on the counter. If it buzzed, he checked it immediately, face angled away from me. At night, he took it with him to the bathroom, the screen lighting the hallway briefly before the door closed. Once, when he set it down and walked out of the room, it lit up with a notification. I didn't move. I didn't reach for it. I just watched the light fade back to black. I told myself I wasn't that person, the suspicious wife, the one who rummages, interrogates, demands. I had spent too many years trusting my own steadiness to abandon it now. Instead, I listened. I listened to the rhythm of his footsteps when he came home, the way his voice shifted when he was on the phone, lighter, almost careful. I listened to what he didn't say, how he stopped talking about the future, about trips we'd once planned, about anything beyond the next week. He began spending money differently too. Not extravagantly, just oddly. Charges that didn't fit our routines, restaurants I didn't recognize, hotel stays labeled as business. When I glanced at the accounts, the balances seemed fine, healthy even. I told myself that meant everything was okay. But something inside me had gone quiet. Not numb, alert. It wasn't fear. It was attention. I started keeping track of small things. Dates, times. When he left, when he returned. Nothing written down yet. Just noted, mentally, like placing stones in a pocket one by one. Aaron noticed my silence and mistook it for compliance. "You've been very calm," he said one night, as if complimenting me. "I'm tired," I replied. He nodded, relieved. We moved around each other with practiced ease. Sophie's routines stayed intact. School pickups, homework, bedtime stories. Aaron showed up for those, performing fatherhood with precision. He smiled for Sophie, praised her drawings, kissed her forehead. Watching them together felt surreal, like observing a scene through glass. I began to realize how much of our life had been built on me smoothing things over, filling gaps, translating moods. Without that effort, everything felt hollow, unfinished. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in the pocket of a jacket I didn't recognize. Expensive fabric. New. I held the paper between my fingers longer than necessary, reading it twice. I placed it back where I found it, folded the jacket, stacked it neatly. That night, I didn't mention it. I wasn't gathering proof yet. I was gathering myself. There were moments I almost broke. Times when I wanted to ask the question directly, to force truth into the open, but something held me back. Not denial. Preservation. I needed to understand the shape of what I was standing in before I stepped anywhere else. Aaron started using words like complicated and timing when he spoke, though never in relation to us. They floated through conversations like smoke, vague and unsatisfying. "Things are complicated right now," he'd say, shrugging off details. I nodded, filing it away. We slept in the same bed, our bodies carefully aligned at opposite edges. The distance between us felt deliberate, chosen. I stared at the ceiling most nights, listening to his breathing, memorizing the sound as if it were already something I might lose. Sometimes I thought about Christmas, the moment, the word, babysitter. I replayed it in my mind, not to torture myself, but to examine it from every angle. What hurt most wasn't the insult. It was the certainty behind it, the assumption. She had asked because she believed it was possible. That meant something about the story she'd been told. That meant something about how Aaron had described me. The thought settled deep, heavy but clarifying. I began organizing things, quietly, digitally. I updated passwords. I backed up files. I made copies of documents I hadn't looked at in years. Mortgage statements, insurance policies, tax records. Nothing dramatic. Just preparedness disguised as order. Aaron didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't think it mattered. One evening, as I was washing dishes, he leaned against the counter and watched me. "You're being very self-sufficient," he said. I smiled without turning around. "I always have been." He frowned slightly, as if trying to remember when that started. There was a grief that came with this phase, a quiet mourning that didn't have language yet. I grieved the ease we'd lost. The way I used to assume he was on my side. I grieved the version of myself who believed trust, once given, was permanent. But alongside the grief was something else. A steadying force. The realization that I was not as powerless as the situation wanted me to believe. I didn't confront. I didn't accuse. I let the silence do its work. Because silence, I learned, makes people careless. Aaron relaxed. He spoke more freely around me, assuming my calm meant acceptance. He stopped guarding his movements as closely. The pattern sharpened, and with each small observation, each quiet confirmation, my intuition grew louder. Not frantic, not desperate, but firm. Something was coming. I didn't know what it was yet. I only knew that the ground beneath me was cracking, and instead of running, I was learning where to place my feet. That winter stretched on, gray and restrained. Snow fell, melted, fell again. Inside the house, everything looked the same. But I was no longer living the same life. I was watching it end, slowly, deliberately, waiting for the moment it would finally show me what it was becoming. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It came in layers, each one peeling back something I hadn't known I was standing on. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Sophie was at school. The house was quiet in that midday way that feels borrowed, like time is briefly yours but won't stay. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop open, half working, half staring out the window, when a notification slid across the screen. Account alert. At first, I assumed it was routine. A payment processed, a balance update. We'd set those alerts years ago, back when transparency still felt mutual. I clicked it without urgency. The number took a second to register. Then my chest tightened. Not sharply, not dramatically, but with a slow, spreading pressure, like something heavy had been placed there without warning. I refreshed the page, logged out, logged back in. The account was almost empty. This wasn't a checking account. This was the one we'd built deliberately. Sophie's education, long-term savings, the future we'd spoken about carefully, responsibly, like adults who believed time would cooperate. I didn't panic. That surprised me. Instead, my mind went very still. I checked transaction history. Transfers I didn't recognize. Large ones. Clean ones. No mistakes. No obvious chaos. Just money moved, systematically, to places I didn't have access to. I closed the laptop and sat there for a moment, hands folded, breathing evenly. I noticed the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, the fact that the world hadn't tilted, even though something fundamental had just collapsed. Aaron came home late that night, later than usual. I heard his car before I saw him, the familiar sound of tires on gravel. He walked in carrying nothing but his phone and a casual smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're home early," he said, glancing at the clock. "I took the afternoon off," I replied. He nodded, distracted. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "We need to talk." He froze for half a second, just long enough. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place where we'd planned vacations, celebrated promotions, filled out school forms together. The light above us cast sharp shadows. It felt like an interrogation room, though neither of us raised our voices. "Where is the money?" I asked. He leaned back, exhaled slowly. "What money?" "The savings account," I said. "The one in both our names." He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. Then he smiled, faintly, as if trying to soften something hard. "I moved it," he said. "It's still ours, just restructured. Without telling me." "It was complicated," he replied. "I didn't want to stress you." I studied his face, not for guilt, for truth. What I saw instead was calculation. How much to say? How little? "How much did you move?" I asked. He gave a number that was smaller than the one I'd seen. "That's not accurate," I said. His eyes flickered. Silence filled the space between us again, dense and revealing. Finally, he shrugged. "I needed liquidity." "For what?" Another pause, longer this time. "For a new start." I nodded slowly, absorbing the phrase. A new start. Not ours. His. "That woman," I said. I didn't use her name. "This isn't new." "No," he admitted. "It's not." "How long?" He hesitated, then said a number that made my throat tighten. "Long enough that Christmas hadn't been a mistake. Long enough that the babysitter comment hadn't been ignorance. It had been positioning." "She knows about Sophie?" I asked. "Yes." "And me?" "Yes." The answers came easier now. The dam had broken. "She thinks you and I are finished," he added almost gently. "That we've been done for a while." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not jealousy. Something closer to offense. "You told her that." He didn't deny it. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the yard looked unchanged. Winter grass, bare branches, a normal evening. I pressed my hand against the glass, grounding myself in the chill. "You used my name," I said quietly, realization clicking into place. "On the transfers." He didn't respond. "You put them through accounts I can't see," I continued. "You made it look like shared decisions." He swallowed. "I didn't think you'd notice." I turned back to him then. "That's the part you misunderstood." He looked at me with something like regret. Or maybe just annoyance that the timing hadn't gone his way. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said. I almost laughed. Instead, I sat back down. "You emptied our future," I said calmly. "You introduced another woman to our child without my consent. You let her think I was disposable." He opened his mouth to speak. I held up my hand. "This isn't a conversation," I said. "It's information." His face hardened. "So what are you going to do?" The question was sharp, defensive. He wanted to know the damage, the fallout. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm going to protect my daughter," I said, "and myself." He scoffed. "You're overreacting." "No," I replied. "I'm adjusting." That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because I was emotional, but because I needed distance, space to think, to let the pieces arrange themselves. I didn't cry, not then. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every quiet moment I'd dismissed, every time I'd chosen peace over clarity. I felt the weight of it all settle, not crushing, but sobering. This wasn't just infidelity. It was strategy. And if he'd been planning quietly, carefully, then so would I. By morning, the shock had cooled into something precise, focused. I made a list in my head. Accounts, documents, names. I thought about Sophie's face at Christmas, the confusion in her eyes, the trust she placed in both of us. Aaron had mistaken my calm for weakness. What he didn't understand yet was that calm is where decisions are made. And from that moment on, everything changed. Not loudly, not violently, but with the kind of clarity that only comes when there's nothing left to lose. I didn't tell anyone right away. That surprised people later, but at the time it felt necessary. Shock has a way of attracting opinions, and I needed silence more than sympathy. I needed space where nothing echoed back at me except my own thinking. The morning after Aaron and I spoke, I woke before dawn. The house was still, the kind of stillness that feels earned. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop closed, letting my thoughts line up without distraction. This wasn't about anger. Anger burns too fast. This was about containment. The first call I made was not to a friend. It was to a family law attorney whose name I found through a quiet search, not a recommendation. I chose her because she specialized in financial abuse within marriages, and because her reviews didn't praise her kindness. They praised her precision. Her name was Janine Moore. She answered on the third ring. I didn't dramatize. I laid out facts, accounts, transfers, timelines. She listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a brief pause. "You did the right thing by calling early," she said, "and by not confronting further." I closed my eyes. Relief washed through me. Not emotional relief, but something steadier. Validation without sentiment. She explained my options carefully. Asset tracing, emergency financial protections, custody considerations, the importance of documentation. She didn't promise outcomes. She promised process. "That's what I need," I said. Process. By the end of the call, I had instructions. Not dramatic ones. Practical ones. Change passwords. Immediately. Open a separate account in my name only. Download and back up all financial records. Do not warn him. I followed them one by one, methodically, like checking doors in a house before a storm. That afternoon, while Sophie was at school, I went to the bank. I wore the same coat I always wore. I smiled at the teller. No one looked twice. I opened a new account and transferred the small amount I was legally allowed to move without triggering alarms. It wasn't revenge. It was shelter. Next, I called Mara, a CPA I'd worked with years ago. Not a close friend. An ally of competence. "I need you to look at something," I told her. Quietly. She didn't ask why. Over the next few days, we worked in parallel. I gathered documents. She followed the numbers. Patterns began to surface. Clean ones. Intentional ones. Accounts linked through entities I didn't recognize. Transfers structured to look routine. "This wasn't impulsive," she said during one late call. "He's been preparing for a while." I already knew that. But hearing it confirmed sharpened my resolve. Aaron, meanwhile, grew relaxed. My calm reassured him. My silence convinced him he was ahead. He started staying out more openly. He stopped hiding calls. He spoke about the future with careless optimism, plans that didn't include me, but didn't bother to exclude me either. "You seem okay," he said one evening, surprised. "I am," I replied truthfully. Because I was no longer reacting, I was acting. Janine filed quietly. Not divorce papers yet. Motions. Requests. Legal holds on accounts I didn't have access to but could now identify. She moved like a chess player, anticipating responses, forcing pauses. "People like this rely on momentum," she told me. "We interrupt that." Every step was deliberate. No threats, no ultimatums. Just facts introduced into the system where they couldn't be ignored. The most difficult part was Sophie. I shielded her carefully. Her routines stayed sacred. Mornings were calm, bedtimes gentle. When she asked where her father was, I answered truthfully without detail. Daddy is working through some things, I said, and we're making sure everything stays steady for you. She accepted that. Children trust tone more than words. One evening, Aaron mentioned Lila casually, as if testing the ground. She might come by this weekend, he said, to see Sophie. I looked at him then, really looked. No, I said. He blinked. Excuse me? That won't be happening, I repeated. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You don't get to decide that alone, he snapped. I do, I replied, sliding my phone across the table. On the screen was Janine's name. And so does my attorney. He stared at it, something dark passing through his expression. For the first time, I saw uncertainty. That was the moment I knew the balance had shifted. He accused me of blindsiding him, of being manipulative, of turning this into something bigger than it needed to be. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I said, You moved money without consent. You introduced a stranger to our child. You told another woman I was irrelevant. This is exactly as big as it needs to be. He didn't have a response for that. Over the following weeks, the truth spread outward. Not emotionally, but legally. Requests led to disclosures. Disclosures led to questions. Questions he couldn't answer cleanly. The calm I carried unsettled him. He expected tears, begging, drama. Instead, he got boundaries, documentation, consequences. Revenge, I learned, doesn't have to be loud. It can be procedural. It can look like patience. It can feel like reclaiming oxygen. One night, after Sophie was asleep, I stood in the doorway of her room and watched her breathe. I thought about Christmas, about the word babysitter, about how small I had been made to feel, and I felt something close to satisfaction, not because he was losing, but because I was no longer invisible. This wasn't about destroying him, it was about restoring myself. And for the first time since everything cracked open, I knew exactly what I was doing. The first sign that this was bigger than my marriage came quietly, buried inside a document I almost skimmed past. Janine had emailed a preliminary disclosure late one evening. I opened it after Sophie went to bed, expecting more of the same. Account names, transaction dates, legal language that had begun to feel routine. Halfway down the page, a phrase stopped me. Pattern consistent with prior filings. I reread it. Then again. I called her the next morning. What prior filings? I asked. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was careful, not alarmed, but precise. Naomi, have you ever heard of a woman named Evelyn Hart? I hadn't. She filed a civil complaint 3 years ago, Janine continued, against a man with a different LLC, different address, different timeline, but the same transfer structure, same shell layering, same withdrawal cadence. My grip tightened around the phone. And the man? I asked. Janine exhaled. Different name, same signature behavior. The room felt very still, not heavy, focused. Mara joined the call that afternoon. She shared her screen, numbers scrolling past in neat columns, side-by-side comparisons, graphs that didn't need explanation once you saw them. This isn't sloppy, she said. It's rehearsed. They'd found at least 2 other women. Similar stories, similar financial blind spots, similar moments of discovery that came just late enough to limit damage, but never early enough to stop it. Aaron hadn't just betrayed me. He'd practiced. What shocked me most wasn't the scale. It was the restraint. He hadn't drained accounts recklessly. He'd calculated thresholds, stayed beneath alarms, used marital trust as cover, not force. That's why the transfers looked clean, Mara said. They were designed to. Janine's tone shifted then. There's another layer. She explained slowly, deliberately. Some of the funds Aaron moved weren't just marital assets. They'd passed through accounts connected to outside investors, small ones, quiet ones, who believed their money was being managed, not rerouted. The overlap was subtle, but once seen, unmistakable. This crosses out of family court. Janine said, and into federal territory. I sat back, letting the words settle. Federal. I thought of Christmas again, of how casual he'd been, of how sure. Do I need to do anything? I asked. No, she replied. You need to do nothing except continue exactly as you are. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a man who introduced himself carefully. He didn't mention Aaron by name at first. He didn't mention crimes. He asked if I was willing to answer questions about accounts tied to my marriage. I agreed. The interview took place in a neutral office. No badges on display. No drama. Just notebooks, quiet voices, and questions that moved in widening circles. Had I authorized these transfers? Had I signed these documents knowingly? Had I been aware of these entities? Each answer felt like another door opening. I wasn't scared. That surprised me too. I felt vindicated. Not emotionally, but structurally. The truth was finally large enough to hold everything I'd sensed. Aaron noticed the shift before I told him anything. He grew tense, watchful. Asked careful questions he pretended were casual. Who called earlier? Why are you organizing paperwork again? Are you talking to anyone about this? I'm handling things, I said. That answer no longer reassured him. One evening he confronted me outright. His composure cracked. Not loudly, but sharply. You've gone too far, he said. This was personal. You've made it public. I met his gaze. You made it systematic. He stared at me then, really seeing me for the first time in months, perhaps years. This will destroy everything, he said. I thought about Sophie, about the accounts meant for her future, about the other women who'd trusted the same quiet confidence. No, I replied. It will correct it. When the formal notices arrived, subpoenas, requests, frozen assets, Aaron didn't rage. He withdrew. The confidence that had once insulated him collapsed inward, leaving something brittle behind. Lila disappeared from the picture without comment. I didn't ask why. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth no longer belonged to him. I wasn't the center of this story anymore. I was the witness who happened to be standing closest when the structure gave way. And as the investigation widened, as consequences took shape beyond my living room and my marriage, I felt something unexpected settle into place. Relief. Not because justice was guaranteed. Not because outcomes were certain. But because the question that had haunted me since Christmas, was I crazy? Was I imagining it? Had finally been answered. I hadn't been wrong. I'd just been early. The end didn't arrive with an apology or a confession. There was no courtroom moment where everything snapped into place and the truth stood up by itself. Justice came the way most real things do. Gradually, then all at once. The accounts were frozen. The transfers reversed where they could be. Custody was settled without spectacle. Sophie stayed with me, her world kept intact, her days still shaped by routine and safety. Aaron became a presence measured by schedules and boundaries, not by power. The investigation moved forward without my participation. I wasn't needed anymore. My role had shifted from source to witness, then quietly, to history. I signed papers. I returned keys. I closed accounts that had once felt permanent. Each action was small, almost mundane, but together they marked the end of something I had lived inside for more than a decade. There was grief in that. I won't pretend there wasn't. I grieved the man I thought I married. The future I'd rehearsed in my mind without realizing how fragile it was. I grieved the version of myself who trusted without contingency, who believed love alone could substitute for clarity. But grief didn't undo me. It softened into something quieter. Acceptance, maybe? Or understanding. In early spring, Sophie and I moved out of the house. Not far. Just far enough. A smaller place near the edge of town where mornings felt slower and the air moved differently through the trees. The first night there, we sat on the floor eating takeout, laughing at how empty everything looked. It feels like camping, she said. I smiled. It kind of is. A week later, we brought home a dog, An older one, calm eyes, no interest in chaos. He followed us from room to room like he was learning our shapes. Sophie named him Cedar. He slept at the foot of my bed the first night and never moved again. Some evenings after Sophie is asleep, I sit on the porch and watch the light change. The sky here doesn't rush. It fades carefully, like it wants to be noticed. Cedar lies beside me, breathing slow and steady. I think about what was taken, about how quietly it happened, about how easily trust can be mistaken for permission, but I also think about what remained. My intuition, my steadiness, my ability to stay present when things fall apart. I didn't win by destroying anyone. I didn't need to. The truth did its own work once it had room to breathe. What I reclaimed wasn't revenge, it was authorship. I decide now where my attention goes. I decide what gets access. I decide what stays. Sometimes Sophie asks questions. Gentle ones, curious ones. I answer honestly, without weight. She doesn't need the whole story. She just needs to know that she's safe, that the world still makes sense. And it does. Not because it's fair, but because it's navigable. The night air cools. The last light slips behind the trees. Cedar shifts closer, his shoulder warm against my leg. I breathe in, slow and deep, and feel the quiet settle, not as absence, but as peace. Some things were broken, some things were lost, but what remains is solid, and for the first time in a long while, that's enough. Thank you for watching the Velvet Revenge channel. See you soon.